Hello from me, David Foster. Now, you may well be at this very moment working from home. I can do my job, you say. The boss agrees. Everyone's happy. End of story. But hold on. The ripple effects of flexible working are enormous and could change society forever. Okay, just a couple of examples. The small restaurant cafe that used to cater for office workers bust. The value of your house in a busy town or city falls because not so many people need to live there. I could go on. In fact, I will.
Flexible working is evolving rapidly and becoming the new norm in many sectors. Flexible can mean different things, but generally describes any role that breaks the traditional 9-to-5, 5-day week routine. The demand for flexible working is high. 92% of millennials look for flexibility when job hunting. 80% of women want flexibility in their next role, and most over 50s want to reduce hours and work flexibly. But there are concerns about the wider impact of more flexible working on society. Research from the University of Kent and Birmingham found that mass home working during COVID-19 presented significant challenges for families. Dr. Hee-Jung Chung of Kent School of Social Policy said, "There are signs that the increased workload and conflict between work and family has negatively impacted parents' mental well-being, especially mothers. Emptier offices in cities have meant less trade for businesses serving that workforce, shops, restaurants and cafes. The ability to work further from the office could also have an impact on house prices and the balance of rural and urban populations. Could flexible working become a kind of industrial revolution, and are we ready?"
Well, time to let the conversation begin. I'm very pleased to say that we can welcome to the round table out of Boston on the east coast of the US, Dan Shaw-Bell, Managing Partner of Workplace Intelligence and author of Back to Human. We travel to Kent, and Hee-Jung Chung is there, reader in Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Kent, and then to London, where we welcome Rohit Talwar, global futurist and co-founder of Fast Future. Great to have you on the program. We are talking about work, so I'm going to read out a few things here, because it's not just working from home, is it? It's parents, their lives could change. Businesses, I mentioned them, shops, cafes, etc., house prices, rural areas versus metropolitan areas, people with disabilities, mental health, the wealth gap, inequality, etc., etc., etc. I'm going to come to you first, Rohit, and say, is there anything I've left out of that, or is every aspect of life going to be affected?
For many people, it will be. If you worked in an office and you're moving to a permanent model of working from home, then every aspect of your life could be affected for many of the reasons you said. But then there's a whole separate issue about those who can't shift. So if you work in retail, you work in healthcare, you work in manufacturing, not much about your life changes, except that many of the facilities and services that you relied on become harder to provide if people start moving out of the city. Schools have less resources, infrastructure doesn't get as much support, councils don't have as much money. So there's a challenge for those who get left behind, as well as those who feel like they're empowered to move out of the city because they can work from anywhere.
And Dan, you're nodding?
Yeah, well, the way I look at our current economy is the pandemic split our economy into three different ones. You have the remote work economy, you have the essential worker economy, and then you have people who are unemployed. And then once you dive deeper, you're gonna witness that there's so many different life situations that make everyone have a different experience during this pandemic, right? Did you save money beforehand? How much money do you have? Where do you work? What industry do you work in? Are you a parent? Are you a single mom? Are you pregnant? There's so many permutations of people's experiences. So I think from a person-to-person perspective, you have to be empathetic. And then from a institutional perspective, you have to be kind of aware of that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, which has made things very complex.
Yeah, Hee-Jung, do you think this is understood by those people who say, "Whoopee, I'm happy to be working from home. I don't have to commute"? The social changes are pretty huge.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, so first of all, I don't think, even if people do want to work from home, and if you look at all the surveys based in the UK or in Europe or US, like a lot of people do want to continue to work from home. The thing is that not everybody wants to work from home 5 days every day of the week. And there's a lot of people who don't want to work at home at all because not everybody has the workspaces. Some people really like to have that boundary between work and family life. But having said that, I think it would probably benefit a lot of people, especially working parents, especially who do not have enough time to do that 1.5 hour, 2 hour commute every day because they have childcare or other kind of demands that they need to adjust to. And I think that actually has been one of the biggest kind of changes that we see is that parents have been able to, well, they had to take more time to spend with children and partners, and has had a great change in their preferences towards what they want to do in the future.
But it is pretty likely to be permanent, isn't it? I mean, whereas 10, 15 years ago, if we'd said, look, the nature of work and where you do it is going to change forever, people would have said, well, you know, maybe in 100 years. I mean, it's pretty likely to be with us forever, this, isn't it?
I think because of the COVID virus and the way that it's being kind of developed now, it is likely that we will have some sort of form of working from home in one way or the other. But again, is it going to be 5 days? It's going to be a few days a week? And who is it going to be? But again, I don't necessarily see this as like, I think it accelerated the process, but it's not necessarily new. This has been something that's been going on for the past few years. And although, the other commenters mentioned that this may provide a very big divide amongst people, I do see that we are also kind of seeing a burgeoning of the future where some of the work that has not been possible to do at home is possible, where like people like healthcare and even education, things are going to go remote. However, it doesn't mean that everything will be done online, and we'll see an increase of activities and interaction of people in smaller communities outside of the work.
Right, I'm going to come to you in just a moment to ask you about those groups of people you feel may be disadvantaged, and I think, Hee-Jung, you may disagree with one group of people that Road's going to put forward. But Dan, I want to come to you now, and I know you think this is permanent as well, but you think it could well increase jobs competition for starters,
Absolutely.
and perhaps hurt the young?
Yeah, it's hurting female. We're in a she session. That's what they're calling it, as in women are getting hurt the most, of course, because of childcare. It's hurting Gen Zs significantly, especially those graduating from school and are having worse job prospects. And your first 10 years outside of school depicts your lifetime salary. So they're chronically going to be in financial harm throughout the rest of their whole careers and lives. So those are all issues. And then there's like everything's a double-edged sword. Remote work is good and bad. There's pros and cons. People working more hours, so they're getting burned out, but they have more flexibility to tend to things personally. But in terms of competition, yes, if you're in Idaho or you're in Australia, you can compete for jobs at Google in Silicon Valley now because most of these jobs are remote. But at the same time, because everyone can compete and there's this massive global talent pool, which sort of existed beforehand, but once you eliminate relocation, now the competition to get those jobs is going to be that much greater, and thus it poses this new opportunity and threat to organizations trying to filter through all these applications. Google gets like millions per year. And then individuals who are trying to make into those companies, yes, they can apply, but they're still competing against all these other people.
Yeah, perhaps we then come into algorithms and who's going to sort through the job applications. We're doing that on another program, so you may want to tune in. Rohit, I know you think that women are going to be disadvantaged, but also I think you said ethnic minorities, those people with disabilities too.
Yeah, and a lot of people at the bottom of the earnings spectrum have suffered disproportionately. And whilst it's great that job opportunities exist in the big tech companies, the technology industry worldwide employs less than 10% of the global population. So we do have to remember all those other people. And what we're seeing right now is three things happening. One is people losing their jobs simply because their business doesn't have the demand, airlines, hotels, you name it. Secondly, a lot of companies realizing that they don't need quite as many staff in the future that they're envisaging because they're planning to automate more, and they're bringing that automation in faster. And then thirdly, there is this sense that a lot of people are starting to make their own choices and go off and do their own thing because they no longer want to be working inside a business. You've also got this factor that whilst it's great to paint this as an individual choice about how many days a week do I want to work from home, do I want to move to the leafy countryside, for most people, that's not a choice that they're making. It's their businesses that are saying, we want to have smaller premises now. We want to cut our overall costs and hence our office costs. And therefore, you're being forced to work from home or maybe from a local shared working facility. So this is having a broader set of impacts. And for those who are, if you like, most disadvantaged by this, the groups we've talked about, the challenge is where are the new employment opportunities going to come? We know that more investments going into green technologies, into the industries of the future. But if you were working as a server in a restaurant, the chances of you getting a job working as a research chemist in a synthetic biology organization or in an autonomous vehicle factory are quite small until you retrain. So the real challenge in all of this is how much we invest in retraining people for the jobs of the future and helping them make that transition.
Think about this, something that Rohit's brought up, which is it's not necessarily your choice to do your work this way. The question is, how do you stop yourself being taken advantage of? Hee-jung, you may want to come back on that one in just a moment, but I want to go back to the fact that Rohit says women could well be disadvantaged in this, but you disagree.
Yes, because first of all, I think one danger that we're all kind of doing right now is that we are trying to use the experience of the home working during this lockdown pandemic, when schools are closed, people were not told to go to restaurants and not go into these public spaces, as some sort of an experiment to look back on to see what's going to happen in the future. Hopefully, the pandemic will go over and that there will be vaccinations, whatever, but that things will go back to normal, including children going back to school. Women's gender pay gap is enhanced when women have children. One reason is because they can't do the very long commutes, whereas dads actually increase their commute to more lucrative jobs. Once people are able to work from home, it is going to be much easier for both men and women to balance work and family life. And again, one of the key things that we are seeing, even during this pandemic, but hopefully in the future, as more people work from home, is that more fathers and men are being involved as well, which will again help reduce a lot of the gender pay gap that we see in current societies. The other point that I want to make about that choice is, yes, absolutely. It is going to have to be some sort of a way that we provide protection for workers to make a real genuine choice. At the moment, most of us do not have the choice before the pandemic, did not have the choice to work from home. And it was the other way around. And as we see probably in the future, there might be workers who may not be given a choice to come into the office. But as we needed to protect workers who did work from home in the past, we then need to be able to provide some sort of protection to workers who need to come into the office for a whole range of reasons, maybe for, because of the lack of space or other reasons. And not because it's just workers' rights, but it just makes business sense. It just is a better way to make production.
Yeah, I'm sitting here wondering with this conversation going on, and you talked about the disadvantaged, right? Whether in fact, if an employer has a choice between somebody who lives in cramped conditions, who says, sorry, get that dog out of here, and tells the children to stop screaming, or somebody who's sitting in a nice, comfortable room, perhaps lined with books or nice smart TVs, they're going to go for the person with greater advantages already because that's less inconvenient for them.
Certainly, you'd like to think that there would be protections for those people in the cramped conditions, that they couldn't be dismissed simply because, of the environment they live in. But I think in a lot of smaller businesses, there won't be the ability for them to fight back, and they will be the ones who go, if the employer feels like they can't have access to them completely, and there is this concern about feeding the cat, grooming the dog, or educating the child. And just coming back on what Hee-jung was saying, unfortunately, the data doesn't back up that point about women and minorities. Right now, they are disproportionately impacted. And as we heard, it is a she session. And my concern is that going forward, it will impact those groups even more as more and more of the jobs go in sectors that are in areas that we're more discretionary in our spending, whether it's restaurants, leisure, entertainment, hotels, travel. All of those tend to employ more women, and they are likely to be squeezed more in the coming 2 or 3 years.
Well, let's go to Dan, because I know you wanted to come in at that point.
He's absolutely right. So women, minorities, women who are minorities, who are, in Gen Z or millennials, they're going to be suffering the most based on the data. And therefore, I think the government, or any government where you are, government in the US, needs to step in. And especially for women, you got to give them some sort of family care and support, because childcare costs are going up, healthcare costs are going up. And going back to the other point, when I was talking about the division economically, most remote workers have full-time wages with benefits, whereas most essential workers are hourly workers without benefits. So again, further division. And I think that's what makes our situation ever more complicated, and us having to realize that remote work is actually a privilege now. If you're able to work remote, I have for over 10 years, way before any pandemic or any issues, that is a privilege. And it was not something that employers liked back then when I first started. Actually, I wanted to work remote. I created the first social media position at a big Fortune 200 tech company, and they said you can't work remote because it'll make your colleagues jealous. Now that company is one of the thought leaders when it comes to remote work. So things have drastically changed. But again, I have full-time salary and benefits. I wasn't an hourly worker who has to worry about going in every day and potentially contracting COVID. And so I think it's going to be a split. I think with remote work in the future, it's a hybrid model. You're going to see some companies go back to full-time, office work. You're going to see some have 3 days in the office, 2 days, remote work. It's going to be all over the place. There's no one size fits all. There's no one solution for every company, because you have to factor in company culture, who the leadership is, the company, the industry. There's so many variables that it's hard to.
So let me read you something
every company
that Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, has said, and this could apply to any metropolitan area. The key thing I think we need to understand is that if we all stay at home working, it's a big problem for central London. Many small businesses rely on your workers going to work, the cafes, bars, the dry cleaners, the shoe repair shops, and others. My question is it a forlorn hope from him? And Dan, to some extent, has covered this, saying actually it's not a one-size-fits-all. But is that a forlorn hope of his, or is it going to be, Rohit, do you think, a mix and match?
It is going to be a mix and match. But if we think about those city centre areas that Sadiq is talking about, they tend to be occupied by big businesses or office-based businesses and retailers. And there's a tight interconnection between them. As you say, the staff in those businesses go to the retailers at lunchtime. They buy sandwiches from the local restaurants. And if they're not going in, and if the businesses are seeing an economic advantage from only having 25% of their workforce in and finding a productivity benefit from that as well, then it's very hard to see how you get that massive shift back where we see 50% plus going back into the office on a regular basis.
And how about this one? Sorry if I'm interrupting, but how about this one? Workers say, fantastic, I'm at home, I don't have to pay for the car park, I don't have to pay for the train fare, I can make my own sandwiches, I don't have to go to the deli around the corner, which we've just mentioned. And the employer, being fairly canny, and that's perhaps why they're in charge, says, hang on, I'm going to cut that person's wages by 10%. That's possible.
Actually, you should actually increase people's wages so that they could have the facilities to work from home. And I think that has been actually going on.
Perhaps that's the morally right thing to do, but what about the chances of an employer doing that? They're likely to say, well, hang on, he's saving costs, why can't I do the same?
I think employers have been doing that based on the types of staff that they could recruit on those low wages. I don't think necessarily employers have been just based on, their wages on every single cost that is involved. For example, if you have a worker commuting from, let's say, from Kent to London, it's not like they're going to add, topping those train fares, the extortionate train fares on those wages anyways.
But they
And
used to have, and I don't know whether it's still the case, something called London waiting, which if you worked in the centre of the city, you got paid more than you did if you lived in leafy Kent, the Garden of England. Therefore, the employer's going to say, hang on, I don't need to pay that anymore. 10% cut in costs.
I think there is a chance for that. And I think there's a chance where, okay, on the good side, on the upside, employers will have a much larger pool of workers to choose from, maybe, all the way from Yorkshire, even outside of the UK, even if labor laws allow to have workers compete for the jobs that are like based in London, so to say. But, again, it is, we have to think about like what is really going to happen in the future in terms of like, would we actually have a full kind of workers working remotely full time? Just another thing, and I'm sorry to keep on banging on about this, but one of the things that I think a lot of the other panelists are talking about. One is about remote working. I think this is what we were trying to talk about. Like, what's going to happen if remote working goes into the future and in the forms that we expect it to be? And another thing is about this pandemic and COVID. And again, the She session is about the fact that a lot of the sectors that women were working in have been disproportionately affected. Two, schools have been shut. That's not necessarily going to be the case in the future. And then we talked about like shops in London as well. I think in the very longer term, there's going to be pop-up shops and lots of different shops and local businesses prosper in a lot of different geographical areas.
Yeah, there was a piece I saw in the London Times in which the writer said, go to cathedral cities, go to bigger towns outside London, and you will see them prosper. You wrote a book, Dan. Is this back to human?
I think this has forced us to connect even more. So as I've seen based on all the data is people are spending more time using video. They're spending more time trying to connect with people because we have, as human beings in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the human desire to have relationships and feel loved and have a sense of belonging with our colleagues, with our family and friends. And so people are desperate for the human connection. And that's why you're seeing even in America, like, people are running back to stores and retail outlets and gatherings, even if they don't think it's the safest thing in the world, because they need other people to function and survive and collaborate. And I've interviewed a ton of world leaders, and they've all said that, yes, being in person is important because that's where true creativity happens. You're bumping along someone else in the hallway. That creates maybe a new idea and maybe an innovative breakthrough for the company. And you wouldn't get that as much with 10 Zoom calls. So I think that we can't discount human connection, but during a pandemic when people are isolated in their homes, you'll see them use technology way more because they have no choice and they have this human need to connect.
Rohit, as a futurist, you know this was going to happen. I'm going to say we haven't got enough time to come back to you, and I want to give Hee Jung a chance to say what it was you wanted to say before I interrupted and gave it across to Dan.
No, it was just the last point that I wanted to make is that the UK has one of the largest geographical inequalities across, compared to other industrialized countries. And again, if we just look past, and it's difficult, and I know that a lot of people are trying to kind of look at the experiences we have now as what's going to happen in the future. But if we look at it in the longer term, I think, having a large scale working from home may actually address a lot of these issues, including geographical inequalities, where you will see a lot of the businesses that may fail now in central London prosper in places like Canterbury or maybe up in Yorkshire, in the places where there is a more high levels of deprivation. And I think it can be quite a wonderful
future. It could be an
future.
equalizer.
Yes, absolutely.
Surprise,
not
Rohit.
now, but in the future.
Surprise, you have got a chance to say something at the end.
I think that's a lovely sunlit uplands view of what's happening. But if you look at the decimation of retails, that's actually destroying regional high streets. The collapse of food chains and businesses unloading huge numbers of their staff. And this does have a footprint for the future because it's changing the nature of work. We know from Kantar's global study that nearly 60% of people around the world have seen their incomes decline. and another 19% expect them to by the end of the year. We're in a changing picture. The next wave of the pandemic is going to have even more of an effect. It's going to lead to more redundancies. That's going to impact across supply chains. And we have to be prepared for 2 to 3 years of transition whilst we go through the pandemic and the economic downturn. This is going to transform high streets. It's going to transform jobs. We will see a lot of businesses disappear. We will gradually see new jobs being created. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of suffering. And those who are well paid and can work from home and have the luxury of moving out of big towns or big cities, great. But for an awful lot of people, this is going to be a very tough time and likely to get worse as the funding for public services inevitably declines.
On that cheerful note, we will say thank you very much indeed, and perhaps we should refer to this as the new industrial revolution rather than that of artificial intelligence. That might need to come after all of this. I thank you very much for taking part in this fabulously interesting discussion here on Roundtable, and thank you wherever you happen to be watching this for joining us. From me, David Foster, from the team that put it all together, we hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.